everybody. It is 1923, and in honor of the 100-year anniversary of the rodeo, that has been our start time since we started doing this back in January. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming again. If you've been here, and thanks for coming for the first time if you have not been to one of our speaker series yet. Just some of the background real quick. As always, bathrooms are in the back if you need them. Refreshments are in the back as well. Help yourself whenever you'd like to. There's merchandise for sale of ours. There is membership for sale of ours if you'd like to support the museum. It's a chance also to look around the museum and see the type of artifacts and stuff that we collect and we display and we house for the Ellensburg Rodeo. So I'm Nate Bradshaw. I have kind of assumed the role of archivist. I've been working with Mike Allen, who a lot of you probably know, to work upstairs in the archives. I teach school at Morgan Middle School. I'm a history teacher, so history and rodeo is kind of my thing, and when I can work both together, it's a good day for me. It's exciting that we're here to talk tonight. It's exciting that we get to talk about the Pharaoh saddles, the Pete saddles, because we have a number of them in our archive upstairs, and we're kind of learning that they are a pretty rare saddle. There's not a lot of them out there, so to house one from the Linder family and one from the Powell family is a big honor for us as well. A quick shout out. We have some events coming up for the Hall of Fame. We have on June 14th, we have our 100th dinner in honor of the 100th rodeo, kind of a kickoff dinner. It's the 100th of the rodeo, and this year is also the 100th year anniversary of the Elks building downtown, so it's housed in the upstairs of the Hotel Windrow in the Elks building. We just got word today actually. We're going to be honored with having Wanapum dancers to come there as well, which is pretty exciting. They'll be putting on a dance, a show, and whatnot for us. There are tickets available online, erhof.com, I believe? Yes, .org, something I should have written down on my card. Okay. We are having our induction banquet. I'm going to back up. At the 100th dinner, we're going to have a chance to roll out our inductees. We're going to have pictures of them and be able to talk about them. We have 5 inductees this year into the Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame. And we're also going to have on August 26th, as we do every year, our induction banquet. There will be a silent auction there. There will be raffles there, and a chance to support the Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame and a formal induction of our 5 members. Again, that's August 26th, and tickets are for sale on our website, erhof.org. And just kind of in the long road, October 13th, we will be having a whiskey tasting. It's going to be fun. It'll be here as well, so celebrate the after the rodeo. So as you can see, we have a beautiful museum here. It's something that funding has been going towards, and it's something that happened before I joined the board a couple years ago, but it's a big step. It's a chance for us to actually showcase everything we've been donated. It's a chance for people from outside of our valley to come and see the rodeo and see what we have and what we stand for. We also have upstairs, we have a big archive. I think we have well over 2,000 artifacts up there, inductee artifacts, saddles, beadwork, other stuff like that. And we have a lot of non-inductee, just Rodeo Hall of Fame, rodeo memorabilia as well up there. So it's an honor to be trusted, to archive, to keep that, preserve that for our next 100 years as well. One more shout out. We have our website. We also have a YouTube page, if you have not been there, that's rather robust. Our YouTube page has past rodeos, has past rodeo parades all the way back to 40s, 50s, so on and so forth. We have also been posting, if you have not seen them, we've been posting all of our speaker series on there. So if you missed Mike Allen, if you missed the contestants last time, or any of them, it's a chance for you to get on there and to listen to them. We have interviews of all of our inductees about their time in the rodeo, and when I joined the board, I got in there and started watching them and learned quite a bit about rodeo before I was around and kind of what these inductees experienced at the Ellensburg Rodeo. So it's a good place to check out if you have not done so yet. To speak a little bit about our technology and some other stuff that our museum is doing is a fellow board member, Ms. Truax.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. We're so glad you're here. My wife, Jamie, always said about our oldest son, there isn't a person he ever met that was a stranger, just a friend he hadn't met yet. So those of you who don't know me, welcome, friends. There's a saint, Saint Martin. He's the saint of cowboys and travelers. So I'm going to invoke Saint Martin. Thank you, folks, for all coming here tonight. Saint Martin, pray for us. Lord, thank you for our gifts and the opportunities we have here to continue on a tradition that identifies Americans. Amen. The French have their food. The Italians got Rome. The British got their castles. There's one thing that identifies Americans more than anything else. And what is that? It's the American cowboy. And one thing that epitomizes the American cowboy more than anything else is rodeo. It shows the might, the will, the sheer perseverance of the cowboy in a public spectacle, not unlike the Coliseum of Rome. And that's what we're here for. The Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame is here to preserve our identity, something that's very special and unique to every one of us in our hearts. In 1967, the Antler Hotel burnt down, taking most of Ellensburg's rodeo history with it. And a handful of people said, well, we got to do something about this. And so this, what you see here today, started. And like Nate said, there's archives and stuff that we're trying to preserve for not only everyone's enjoyment, but a lifestyle that identifies us. We have to keep alive. We have to get young people interested in. And that's what we're doing with technology. I'm the director of technology, and we have started with security. We have a monitor we turn off for these events, speakers and things like that for speaking events. And we're intending to even have interactive displays and stuff to get young people kind of interested. When was the last time you saw a 16-year-old that was, hey, how you doing? No, they're doing this. And so if we have some interactive things for young people, it'll get them interested in what we're doing and hopefully keep this tradition going. One of the interesting things about rodeo and Ellensburg Rodeo in particular is saddles. We're going to talk a lot about saddles tonight. You might have heard of the Ellensburg tree. Well, T.W. Farrell made a tree in the old days to help keep cowboys in their saddles. And I'll tell you what, I'm very grateful for that tree because that's my saddle right there. And it's on a T.W. Farrell tree. It was custom built by a local saddle maker. And I have 35,000 miles on that in the mountains as a professional outfitter and packer. And it has saved my bacon a lot of times. I was glad I was not on a slick fork. But the Peds, they made a saddle too. This is an Ellensburg saddle. And we got in an argument over the years. I guess it's been more of a competition, friendly competition. Who built what? This is Hamley's full front saddle. This is mine from 1913. As you can see, it doesn't look a whole lot different than these right over here. And it kind of started a competition. Who built the best saddle? Either way, what we are looking at here is what evolved into the association tree. And it's what you're seeing saddle bronc riders riding on today. And with that, we have a special guest tonight who it was kind of Joel and Janneman and a few other people's idea. But we have a special, talented man tonight who is a saddle maker. His name is Janneman Pienaar. And he is building on a T.W. Farrell, we're not going to call anybody named Ellensburg Tree, 100-year anniversary saddle for the Ellensburg Rodeo. And he's here tonight to talk a little bit about it and the history. He's studied on this for years, and he's here to talk about it to us. And by the way, we'll be having a raffle for that saddle, so buy a raffle ticket. Janneman, would you come join us, please?
Am I up or he's up?
I'll fill in if you want me to.
Well, I don't know what to say, but I'm gonna have Nate. He prepared a little speech, and then I'll take over from there to kind of fill in the gaps, I guess. Since I'm really still African American, so most people don't understand me that well. But I also thought if you guys want to ask questions while we're talking, to give it context, because there's a lot of history is cloudy. Like, it was recorded, but only one person's view. So there's a lot of contention between the different writings we can find, and even the physical saddles.
So my name is Janneman Pienaar. I grew up, born and raised in Southern Africa. I moved to the US, became a citizen. And these days, I make people's dreams come true by building them exquisite saddles, but actually highly functional saddles that allows them to achieve their performance to the highest level. I break my saddles down into 5 categories when I build them. First is I build a tree that's going to allow the horse's back to just function, for that horse to preserve its best posture and be in a power position when you ride him. Secondly, I want the rider to be balanced and their core muscle group engaged, so they are in balance when they're in motion. That's going to give them the best sort of shot at not falling out of the saddle or staying strong. And thirdly, I built a quality saddle. Everything is thought out to where the stitches are recessed in the leather is pre-stretched, things are tight, thought out to create a saddle that's not going to just fall apart after 2 years. Fourthly, I want to make it look good, so the proportions are in such a way that it aesthetically is pleasing, and then create artwork on it. And then my name is on it, so I want it to be a classic. So it's gonna have resale value. It looks good, but internally it's designed to achieve your goal of having a horse not getting sore, working to its potential, and then ride it while in balance. The way I design my ground seat, I don't want to build a couch. That's not what I'm doing. I'm building a seat that will support you while you're in motion. I can tilt the angle of the cantle in various ways depending on the rider. Male versus female, females, the pelvis wants to naturally easily roll forward because of the angle of the femur coming in. Also, the gluteus muscle sits up higher where it's attached to the bone. If the cantle is too steep, it's going to keep rolling you forward, which will make your low back trying to counterbalance lordosis, but pretty soon your back will be sore. If the saddle is too wide up front, you're getting spread apart, but you gotta have a nice pocket in the back for the pelvis to rest and find a neutral position, and then the femurs can slant in, so that's how I shape the seats.
All right, that was a big build-up for Janneman, which is exciting, but you get to listen to me for a second or two. Told you I'm a history teacher at Morgan. History is my thing. And I joined Mike Allen, who's a fellow archivist and historian, in researching the saddle. I joined a little bit later. He had done quite a bit on it beforehand. But I've been researching quite a bit of history on the saddle and putting together some information. So let me set the scene for you on the history of this saddle. 1854, a young man follows in the trail of his brother. His brother is chasing a girl across the country on the Oregon Trail because the girl's father said, "You shall not marry my daughter." Took off to Oregon Territory, and his brother said, "I'll marry her." Followed them across to Oregon Territory, wins her hand in marriage. His brother is by the name of Ben Snipes, who you might have heard of. He's an Oklahoma cowboy who establishes himself in 54, 55, 56, and gets to himself to be running, they say, up to 10,000 cattle between the Dalles, the Columbia River, up through our valley, up through Wenatchee Valley. And in that time period, he runs himself into some trouble, and he realizes that the local horses are ponies. The Cayuse ponies. They're a small statured, stout horse. When he's out there with his cowboys, that's not what they're used to. He meets a man who's got what's called the Hambletonian stallions. Hambletonian being a famous thoroughbred who's arguably the father of modern day thoroughbred racing in America, tracing back to England. So these large thoroughbred stallions, and in the Times, Snipes buys some of these stallions, gets more shipped from Kentucky, and in the breeding program, he kicks these stallions out into the Horse Heaven Hills. Right? They're going to breed with the local ponies, and they're going to create essentially their own type of horse that becomes rather notorious with being a hard-to-ride horse. So Snipes cowboys are out there with 10,000 cattle, right, rounding them up, trying to do their thing, and they've got horses that are hard to sit on. So local legend, local stories goes that they come to Ellensburg. They ask a man named T.W. Farrell, Thomas William, or Billy Farrell to build them a better saddle, one that they can stay seated in, they can ride these horses, they can ride the range and do their thing. Farrell asks, there's many pronunciations, Ernest Bedetscher, who is a German immigrant who was working for him at the time to build this saddle. So the original story went that Bedetscher built this saddle. He was working for Farrell. So, I mean, you look here, they've got the Farrell stamp on the back, and they're Farrell saddles. We see some images here that have claims of home of the Ellensburg full front bucking saddles at T.W. Farrell's shop. So Farrell gets the original lay, or the claim to the Ellensburg Tree Saddle. Farrell, just to let you know, comes to Ellensburg in the late 1880s. He buys his brother's saddle shop, James E. Farrell, his saddle shop in 1891, runs it till 1915, 1916. But, so we published this. We put it out in the newspaper. It was pretty well documented. It was what we'd heard growing up and whatnot. And individuals came forward letting us know that, in fact, there are other claims to this tree. We as historians were going, oh man, like this was all nicely wrapped up. We had this together. We're good to go. We were in the process of working with Janneman to build this saddle, right? We wanted to have our ducks in a row for this. And we started to look into this, and in fact, yes, there's another man that I'll introduce you to. His name is Billy Peed. He came to Ellensburg in 1883, so before Farrell did. He opens himself a shop in 83, 84, so about 10 years before Farrell ever opened his shop up. We know that Peed, it's rumored, also built this Ellensburg Tree Saddle. there's some overlap. 89, Pete loses his shop. There's the fire of 89. You've probably heard of it before. Pete had his shop where Mountain High Sports is now on the far right side, right up against the alley, right of that stall front, that storefront. That was Pete's shop, saddlery and harness. And it goes in 89, as most of the town does. And we get record after that of Pete working with Farrell for a year or two. And then Farrell goes in with a man named Wagger for a couple years before the early 1900s, creating his own saddle shop again. So we get some overlap of individuals. We do know that Pete eventually sells his shop to his son Clarence, and this lasts all the way to the 30s or the 40s. They go into upholstery, into furniture, and all that type of stuff. So Pete comes first. He lasts much, much longer than Farrell ever did. Farrell gets the name as of right now, though. So we know there's overlap. We have proof that Pete was here. We have proof that Farrell was here. We have proof that there was a Baditcher who was here, and he was working for Farrell's shop. It's all in the library. We did all that fun historical research that we geek out about. So, what do we know about this? We don't know. I have spent hours at the library. I've spent hours online. I've spent hours contacting saddle companies in Oregon, talking to historical societies, looking for that one nice little thing that said, I, Billy Pede, made the Ellensburg Tree Saddle. That did not happen, right? The Ellensburg Tree Saddle was probably not known as the Ellensburg Tree Saddle at that time period. They did not know that they were making a revolutionary saddle at the time. They just knew the cowboys of Snipes' herds liked them, and it was successful in that sense. They could have both been making the saddles at the same time. There was a total of 2, maybe 3. Charles Winter had a saddle shop in the town, and the town's the size of Ellensburg. They talked. They knew each other. They were buddies and friends. In fact, this becomes a famous enough saddle, and Mitch talked about this a little bit, that some other people decided to jump in on it as well. We have a George Lawrence company, which was one of the largest saddle makers at the time, out of Portland, Oregon, that claims to have created, it's called the Swell Fork. I'll let Janneman get more into this. But this tree, this type of saddle, we had a company, the Al Frustnow company from Miles City, Montana, and then we had Victory Martin Saddlery out of the Dalles, who all still claim that they are the ones who built this saddle. Why do we care? Why do we care? Are we historians trying to make a big deal out of nothing? Sometimes we do that. We take something we enjoy and make it bigger. I teach school, and I do that quite a bit, actually. So, we care because go ahead 20, 30 years, and in 1919, 1920, 4 main rodeos of the West, the Cheyenne Frontier Days, Walla Walla Frontier Days, Boise Rodeo, and the Pendleton Roundup, realized that there was an unfair advantage for the rider over the horse. They were building something called bear trap saddles, and they essentially went over top of their leg, and it kept the cowboys in so long it was hurting the livestock. That time period, there was no 8-second ride. You rode till you fall off and whatnot, and if you didn't fall off, it was going to hurt. It got to the point, actually, I was told a story, that at the Pendleton Roundup, there was a woman who tied herself, and it was common to tie yourself to the saddle. She died from this, got bucked, causing women to lose riding broncs and riding rough stock in rodeos at that time period. The contractors got together and said, this isn't fair. We're not going to bring stock to rodeos. We don't want to do this anymore if our stock's going to be hurt. And these 4 rodeos worked with Hamley out of Pendleton and created what was originally called the committee saddle, later became known as the association saddle, based on what they called the modified Ellensburg tree. This saddle is still around today. It gets adopted in 1929 by the Rodeo Association of America, in 37 by the Cowboy Turtles Association, 45 it turns into the Rodeo Cowboys Association, And since 1974, we know it as the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. It's the saddle that they still use today and is the standard saddle used for, I believe, all events at this point for PRCA. It is based on the Ellensburg tree, the tree that was built here in our town. So it's a good piece of history. It's something that we should all be proud of. It's something that cowboys are going to know. It's something that all cowboys have ridden on at some period as well. And it's something that's a legacy in not only the Ellensburg Rodeo 100 years later, but in rodeos across our nation at this point. I got light on specifics on how the saddle was made. Everything I have learned, I have taught myself. I used to know my favorite part of the saddle was the horn. So I always had one hand gripped on that horn no matter what, bopping along. So if it had a sturdy horn, I was happy with the saddle. I have the last year or so worked with Janneman, learned more about saddles than I have known, and I still can't say I know that much about them. So I'm going to let Janneman talk about the creation of the saddle, let him talk the specifics of a swell fork versus slick fork, and let him have the floor. At the end, just to let you know, there will be plenty of time for questions. As we're rolling through this, if you have questions, I should have prefaced this. If you have questions at all, please let me know. Raise your hand. I'm a teacher. I'm used to it. I don't think I've ever had somebody be this quiet for my talk the whole time, and nobody's asleep yet either, so that's pretty good in my book. I'll take it. But if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have stories at all, we are very welcome to hearing that. That's been a big highlight the last 4, 5, 6 months as we've been doing these, for sure. Stuff that we don't know about, stuff that's fun to have on record, fun for everybody to share with. Anybody worth questioning? Anything we need to address? This is Janneman Pienaar.
Well, Nate, I think you said it all. Well, like Mitch was saying, a lot of kids are just, they don't have something to do. And I think it's part of our job to preserve something and preserve the West, because that's most people's heritage in this country, whether you believe it or not. To step back, why Ellensburg? But how do we get here? We don't know, but a lot of people just get here and they get stuck. But to go back, Spain, obviously had territory, what was known as the Californios. Baja California, Alto California. In Alto California obviously became modern-day California. And they established from San Diego all the way to San Francisco what was the King's Road, or the Royal Road, the El Camino Real. And they established missions every 30 miles. There was a day's ride with a horse. And at all the missions they had cattle. And that became California's currency, the cattle trade. And they had hundreds and thousands of them. But they didn't really eat the meat. They would just, it was the hide and tallow trade. And they will butcher the cattle and just leave them on the fields. And the grizzly bear population just exploded. If you look at the California flag, there's a grizzly bear on it. Because there were thousands and thousands of them. And then they all disappeared when the food source dried up. But so many, the influence of saddles, if you look at a lot of saddles, they have stamping and carving on them. It all comes from Europe, out of the big cathedrals and the churches. It's just that Catholic heritage that came through Spain, came up from California, and they still used the decorations. And they had a type of saddle that they will cut a tree trunk, a tree growing and it splits into a Y. They'll cut it off, chop it off, flip it upside down. That fork became the saddle fork. They'll just flip it this way, the horn, and then the Y, they'll attach bars to it that they can fashion a saddle. So over time, they came up north, kept coming north. Nate was mentioning Ben Snipes. He had, Ben Snipes was so far north, he was called the Northwest Cattle King. He was the largest cattle herd holder that provided all the mines in Canada with meat. But it wasn't for him, they couldn't survive. So he told you the story about they improved their horses, and these saddles. So there weren't that many saddle shops. They were Mexico, whatever came up slowly, and then in San Francisco there was a few, and in Portland, and in nothing, and in behold, there's a couple that popped up in Ellensburg, and they took the existing. And Slick Fork, like I said, there's nothing in front of you. There's a horn, and that's about it. So they wanted to come up with something that when you just wouldn't fall out. And we don't know if they just took a bunch of leather and just padded it up, the existing frame they had. There was different attempts with what's called a bucking roll. So it's like a cushion, almost like a pin cushion that will stuff with horsehair. But that was developed in Portland. The guy there got a patent for it. So these guys, so we see a bunch of, like, this is an example, maybe afterwards you guys can look at it. It's like a box almost. It's flat on top, and then it went straight down. That would have been the first, probably, advancement in trying to have a little bit more in front of you. And the horn also got smaller, because before they had a big, fat wooden piece, and then they got replaced with metal, so it didn't have to be so big anymore. And then, but most saddle shops today, and even back then, didn't make their own trees. They relied on some other place. There was a place in Walla Walla called the Ringhofer Brothers that made trees for probably the entire Northwest at the time. And that's why when Nate was mentioning there's other people that lay claim to the design, they probably all got this tree at the same place. So when the tree maker probably told their customers, hey, this is a hot item, are you interested? But that didn't really happen till the early 1900s. But as far as the records, the Ellensburg advancements were in the 1880s already. So they didn't really get to capitalize on it too much because it became like wildfire. So one will think the people in Texas did this. No, they didn't. They benefited from it much later. It was a Northwest thing where the swell fork or the modern day saddle got its roots. And then how come Ben Snipes didn't go to Hamleys? Well, Hamleys didn't exist. They weren't around till 1905. And they really made harness for all the, if you go to Pendleton, that area is just wheat fields. They also, Hamleys also bought their trees from the Ringhofers. And then when the rodeo associations, or not the four, was it Walla Walla? Help me if I'm wrong. Walla Walla, Cheyenne, Pendleton, and Boise. Those guys wanted that standardized tree, but they went to Hamleys, but Hamleys had their own contender. Hamleys had what was called a form feather, but they didn't go for that. They created their own, and what did they create it from? There was, by then, the Ellensburg. Like we said, before that, it was called a full front bucking saddle, because they didn't know what they were doing. But then eventually, it was referred to as the Ellensburg. So the Ellensburg was flat on top, straight across. It came down, and then straight down in the beginning. But it wasn't called an Ellensburg yet. It was just the advancement. And then over time, it got wider and wider. But when it's too wide, you can't make a saddle, so they sweep it back in. And that is what we refer to as the swell. So it was flat on top, and it's sweep back in. So what Hamleys did to modify it, they just put less undercut in it. So instead of having a big swell, it just became a maximum of 1 inch. That is to this day, that is the definition of that, of no more than 1 inch of undercut. And the other thing I did is, instead of having it flat on top, it became slightly sloped. And then over time, they still had a saddle horn on it. The saddle horn was part of a bronc saddle for a long time, till 1955. They eventually threw the horn away. In the cantle, and you can see some of these saddles, they don't all have it, but the cantle was very straight up and down. Like nobody likes to ride in that. So they made it, they were leaning it back more and more as time went by, and then shortened it, so it's not so tall. So essentially it made the seat bigger and more comfortable to ride. So this saddle here is a very good specimen of a association tree. So how is that different than Ellensburg? The Ellensburg is just flatter on top and has more undercut that can catch your thighs. But so basically, the story we're trying to tell is that, so where did the modern day saddle come from? Well, the roots is right in this town. And then, you know, every saddle today is a variable of that. It's not exactly, but it's within range of that original design. It is a modern day saddle, still is very related to that. It is, so that's the story we're trying to get out. Is we're relevant in shaping the last 100 years of rodeo, not just rodeo, battle racing, the roping events, the cutting, the reining, all has its roots coming back to Ellensburg and then back down California, back to Mexico, back to Europe. Now, you'll probably find people that disagree with this, but they have to prove it. But it's pretty documented that Hamleys modified the Ellensburg. And where did the Ellensburg come from? Obviously, was mostly developed here. Did they tweak it? Probably. Hamleys probably tweaked because the Ellensburg tree was named the Ellensburg in 1905. Hamleys didn't copy it till 1919, so there was a bunch of years in between. They probably could have altered it a little bit. But then Hamleys still didn't make their own trees till 1927. So they went somewhere else as well to get it made, and that's why it spread so much. My thinking is because they use a centralized supply for the trees, and those guys were shipping to Montana. The only other tree makers at the time were back east, but they were making military saddles, not Western saddles. It was like the McClellan saddles, like the U.S. cavalry saddles. That was a big thing over there. And then later on, you see things pop up everywhere. But San Francisco, Portland, and then you have a few shops scattered in Montana, Oregon, and here. It's kind of what made the bulk of saddles. But are you going to bring a speaker to the question? Or do we repeat the script?
Yeah.
Sure, he was going to ask.
Are these are saddles for working cowboys, or are these saddles for saddle bronc riders? And didn't they make a uniform saddle for the competitive cowboys?
Yeah, so so if you go up to the windmills, there's an electric car that was built in 1905. But I don't think a lot of people drove electric cars back then. Even if you had a car, I don't think you got very far. So the late 1800s, if you didn't take the train, you still took a horse most places. So it would have been whoever bought a saddle at the time. And they were probably more popular because there was more security involved all of a sudden. And like, there was no standard in rodeo, and that's why the four associations came together and wanted to standardize it for the bronc riders.
So something Janneman has kind of lighted over and skimmed over is the fact that he is putting hours upon hours recreating the Ellensburg Tree Saddle. He has done research beyond a historian's belief to get this accurate. Small little things that we thought were pretty nominal, Janneman has questioned. He has found saddles from elsewhere in the U.S. He has measured, I'm pretty sure, every saddle that there is in this county that was a Farrell or Pete saddle. He is making a true replica of the 1880s, early 1890s Ellensburg tree, which is an honor. It's a great opportunity for us as a community to have a true replica of this saddle, for the saddle to be born again in the town that it was originally born in. And it's a great opportunity for a rodeo, right? Our rodeo grew up after that saddle, after the committee and the organization saddle took off. We're one of the top rodeos now, and we are using that saddle that was born here in our valley. So it's a true honor. So Janneman, thank you for doing that. We all appreciate that very much.
No, it's fun.
Janneman, can I ask you to speak on something? I was just curious if you would share, just coming from South Africa, I assume you weren't necessarily up to date on all this history or even the Western saddle of the history, but what made you interested in this type of saddle as you moved over to Ellensburg?
Well, I needed the saddle. I was just broke, so I had to. Well, yeah, I came over to learn about horses and horseshoeing and learn from trainers. So naturally, I wanted saddles. But early on, I got interested in more function than not the artistic part, but always function. So I learned early on to make my own trees, and like I mentioned, to this day, it's easy to go buy it. It's easy to make a saddle quickly if you have the tree, but if you have to build it, it's a whole nother ball game. So that obviously I had to do a lot of research to not just modify them, but you got to start. You got to know why and how I want to change it, this and that, and naturally you find all the shapes and sizes and then you come across the history and this and that. And then since I found myself in Ellensburg, it's like, hey, there's a saddle called Ellensburg. I've known about this for years and years. I didn't know why. Because there's a Will James, there's a Oliver Young, a Buster Well, there's a lot of names and you just don't care. And then I got to thinking one day, wait a minute, if that was the first swell fork, then all the saddles from here to Texas are descendants from that. So that's basically a cool story.
What makes them so useful, or just why did it take over as the standard using saddle?
Well, I mean, it depends who you talk to. So some people will argue the slick fork still has its place, and it does, especially people that work slower, don't do the speed events. They just do branding on ranches. The horn usually on those, the slick fork saddles are lower to the horse's wither, so the center of gravity is lower. So if you dally and drag cattle all day long, it's easier on a horse. But the speed events, you don't have all that constant drag on a horse. So it created a little bit more leg room, because a slick fork, I know that's kind of technical, but a slick fork usually leans forward, but if it leans forward, the bottom half is coming back into you, where your legs are. So a swell fork stands up, so it creates more thigh room that can go forward and then catch you. So that's why as soon as you speed things up, a swell fork just gives you a little more room, and more room is more security, believe it or not. If you run into something, it bounces you out. If you have room to slide and then hit it, it's going to stop you. And it became popular, yeah. No, it's good.
No, you're fine.
Tree underneath the horn, is the horn part of? Is it
So
metal?
99. So the saddles made in this country are, most of it is wood inside, and then covered. The wood's reinforced, And then usually they have a steel horn that's bolted into the fork. Now the ones with the big horns, usually that's part of the wood. But this will break off if it was wood. But yeah, it's the frame inside called the tree. It's all wood, unless it's made in Brazil. It'll be hollow fiberglass. Oh no, that is the shape of the wood, and it's one layer of leather. I should have brought a picture of a tree. It looks just like that. If you can rip this off, if you rip this leather off, the wood will be that shape.
Would you be able to, pardon me, if you would be able to, I think you can hear me.
All right.
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
If you could just kind of talk about each of these saddles and the making process.
Janneman, there's a slick fork right here if you want to use an example of it.
Yeah, can you bring it over, or is it?
I can help you.
Actually, I see Vicky over there. She might know more about this than I do. She used to run the hitching posts, and she's dealt with buckaroos across this entire Northwest for longer than I've been alive. So the oldest saddle, right, is this one right here. So in the making of it, this is a very typical late 1800 saddle. So you can tell by the way they did things what era it's from. If you look at this saddle up close, so this is called the cantle. So the front of the cantle is part of the seat, and then you have the part you're sitting in. But if you come look at this afterwards, you'll see it's two pieces. The cantle is one piece of leather, and then the seat is another. That was very typical of the time. They also had what's called a loop seat, where the stirrups popped right through the seat and then go back down. And there's two theories about that. One is they didn't have really good glue at the time, so it helped holding the seat down. But probably the biggest thing is they didn't have buckles when they tied the stirrup leathers. It was called a full double. It was like 120 inches of leather. So the stirrup leathers was wrapped around twice. So it took you about 2 hours to adjust the length on one side. So it made it a lot easier if you can pull the stirrup leather up through the seat. So this loop, this exposed part, made it so you can adjust it, because you attach it on the like the bottom, which was on the inside, but it was up high, so it was a nightmare to change. So the split seat, loop seat, dates the saddle to that era. They also had square skirts. It was very common. The round skirt came later, kind of like that. It wasn't till Hamleys really introduced that. And then also the handhold, like the early ones, it was an 8-string seat, so the front part of the seat was also separate. You can see this little piece here. It's not attached to the seat. Where a modern day saddle, it's all one piece. The cantle, the seat, and the seat jockey is all one piece. So this is 3-piece seat with the loops, very typical of the time. And they had no handhold, meaning right here under the fork, they just cut the seat straight across. Today, you can usually get your hand in there. Also, this is the binding on the cantle of that time period. Is all they did. The fancy ones had a binding like this, where you take a piece of leather and wrap it all over and sewn it. Before that, they just didn't even do that. They just sewed it together with no fancy piece. What's called the Cheyenne roll, none of these saddles have one. It was supposedly developed in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a bit later. But that's what you see today. It's much more popular is the white piece that comes across. And some people claim it's safer to have that because if you get bucked off and you come down, there's nothing to wedge you open. In the old days, they had what's called a shovel cantle, and I've known people that have ridden a bucking horse, come down, it'll split your pelvis open. So anything flat here helps. So this saddle was made in Ellensburg probably more than 100 years ago, this very one. They weren't very ornate. They didn't do much tooling or silver here in Ellensburg. They did at the same time they did it in California. They were very famous for that. But for some reason, the guys up here didn't do it as much. So this is a Hamley Parade saddle, 1924. So Hamley's was a production shop. They weren't accused of the very best saddles, but they made a lot of them. Both of these are Hamleys. About probably, did you say 1913?
Yes. I took that with Hamleys and had their historian look up the maker and the number on the back, and it's a pre-fire saddle. That fire was in 1917. Is what they told me. I don't know.
With that, which is interesting because the first Ellensburg shows up in Hamley's catalog in 1911. So this is only a couple years after that. I don't know what they would have called this. Because the association wasn't invented yet. But it does look like an association because it's slightly sloped and it has just a little bit of undercut. But the association was 14 inches wide, and this is less than, so 12 and a half. So it needs another inch and a half to become that. This is essentially, well, this is a bastardized slick fork. It's not as slick as the what is known today as a Wade or a buckaroo saddle, but you can see there's not a lot of what we call a swell here. It has the little horn like a modern day saddle. Parade saddles was very common. 1924, that's kind of before they were really a big deal, but you can see that the progression though. See, this one has buckles to change the stirrup length. Hence, by then, when they made this in the 20s, there were no more loops in the seat. Seat was one piece. This one still have a two-piece seat, but if you look at the old one, you'll see there were no buckle. It's just string together, laced together. This is a half double, not a full double, but this was half as annoying to change. And a little easier. And then this is just a rendition of it's just a modern day saddle. You know, padded seats came in later, a little bit of cushion, round skirts. So.
Thank you. We had one more question. We'll go here and then we'll go back over there.
How many hours of time when you actually put into building this replica saddle? And I've seen a lot of your work. It's amazing the artistic work that you put into your saddles. Will there be any tooling or any special Janneman art in this replica?
Well, time-wise, it depends how much wine I drink, but no, it's slower to start with because I already made the tree. I'm working on it, but so for instance, when you make the tree, I use special, to fit a modern day horse. Well, this thing is based on 100 years, so I had to change all the patterns, which takes you a lot more time. and I had to build special jigs to hold to cut the cantle because they're so upright. So it takes longer than you think doing that. So I'm trying to make it historically correct, but still. So I was struggling with the thing. It's like, how precise do I make it historically correct and put my spin on it? Because I don't want to just build a saddle. So there'll be. I'm gonna try to honor the style of decoration of the time, but my version of it. So I'm not gonna do modern day tooling. It'll be what they did in the time, but the way I would do it if I was the employee. And then a couple small things to just make it a little more relevant to the modern day era. Just so because it is the father of the modern day saddle. So I want to kind of bridge the gap. I don't want to look so old-timey that it looks like it belongs in a John Wayne movie. I wanted to have people have a connection to it. So that's the idea.
Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, is there any documentation in these small saddle shops here in Ellensburg? How many saddles could they make in a year?
I don't really know. We found tax records of the Pete shop. One year they sold 400 saddles.
Yeah, they claimed 491 in 1 year, but I think it was 491. They claimed, though, it was interesting, and this is what kind of turned me on to it. They claimed that they outsourced to the George Lawrence Company out of Portland. So tried to get records from George Lawrence Company, not so good. Records are left from 100 and some odd years ago. But it's just interesting thinking of you probably had Billy Pete and one other guy in there making 491 saddles from scratch. Would have been pretty prolific at the time period. So some are claimed on that, but I don't know. We haven't fully tracked that down at this point.
Well, the way they made saddles back then is in candlelight too, but you didn't have one guy doing everything. You had the guy that ran the sewing machine. That was his job. And then you had one guy. So they broke it down. It's not a production line, but each person became really proficient at doing 3 or 4 things. And then, if you had 10 employees, they got through stuff pretty quick. I don't, obviously had the trees shipped in. I'm not sure about sewing machines, because back then the sewing machines were really finicky and they run on linen thread. That's one thing we couldn't find, is what they would have used or any of that. It is ultra fine stitching. If you look at the old stuff, though, stuff in the museums too, it's very meticulously done, even under oil lamp light or whatever they had.
Janneman, you talked about. Oh, go ahead.
What did it cost? Were you able to find that out?
What a saddle cost back then?
What did they sell them for?
Oh, I don't know. If you look at the old catalogs, some saddles were like $13 or $7. I don't know. But I just saw somewhere a house in the 50s? It was like $7,500. So I don't know.
It's relevant, but yeah. Janneman, you talked about you're building this saddle now for a modern day horse.
No, not a modern day horse. Not. It won't fit a modern day horse.
So how has the horse changed in the last 100 years?
They got fat. Well, so the back in the day, thoroughbreds was the thing. It infiltrated everywhere. But then the quarter horse industry, everybody heard of Doc Bar. He kind of screwed it all up because he didn't have withers, and his rib cages were flat. And then they bred those like crazy in Texas. And the whole modern day quarter horse thing has become a mutton wither horse. So it's a much flatter, broad back, not the not the thoroughbred. So those old saddles were very, very narrow. But the people must have been smaller too, because the seats were really small. They didn't eat meat. Yeah, but this is a big one, because this is, a lot of them are 12, 13-inch seats, but with an upright cantle. So that is a very, very, very small. I mean, that saddle horn will be poking in your belly real easy.
I got you.
So hi, how are you?
Good to see you, Mr. Lee.
My take on that is that particularly the saddle sitting in front of you is ridden straight up, straight knees,
Mm-hmm.
which you wouldn't need to move the cantle back or to make that much more room if you're standing like that, which is horrible to ride. I've ridden those saddles and they're not fun. But yeah, the people were quite a bit smaller. But that was my take on why they could be so short between the horn and the cantle, just because if you ride straight up, yeah, you're not taking up that much room.
Yeah, you're correct. If you look at all the conquistador drawings and stuff, they have that sort of up and down look. And if you look at the armor in the museums, people wore those, and it's little. I mean, there's no way we can fit in those. So. Yeah.
That was the way you got the leverage with the lance. Oh, I was just saying that's upright like that, straight up was the way you got leverage with the lance. I mean, if you're sitting down, you're just going to rock back. If you're standing straight up, you can lean into it. Anyway, I'm wrong. So
Yeah, but like the modern day saddle, like team ropers, they're buying smaller seats again from the 70s and 80s, where they had big seats like that. They felt they were too far back, trying to stand up. It was hard. So now they make the seat small again for that again to be upright. So now it's nuance to the discipline you do. Barrel racers, team ropers usually have small seats, where cutters and reiners have extra long seats. Even bronc saddles are rather bigger than smaller.
It may be worth talking about that as a moment, since it was the association that started that with the bronc riding. They needed the, the bines are changing, quarter bines, so you can reach up to the front and get in the shoulders and do the spurring motion.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously they wanted to standardize it, but so Hamleys had a form feather saddle. There was a few, like Nate said, there was a bear trap. So where if you go to Pendleton, Oregon today, there's still a saddle in the entrance where it has like almost look like horns, but it's part of the swell that they made for the guy because he would drink and pass out. But the horse knew where home was, so it'll just walk him home and he won't fall out. So, exactly. But this. Hamleys had a couple people working there, and they went on their own. It's called the Sevier Brothers. They had their shop, and they actually made the modern day bronc saddle what it is today. They got rid of the horn. I think many places they even still call it the Sevier bronc. But basically, it's like anything. We had Model T Fords. It's a car, but today you have a Tesla. Everybody put their twist on it to make it better. But yeah.
What kind of wood do you use on the tree?
So it depends. Like me personally, I don't like any knots in it. So what I would do, I cut the wood up and then laminate it, so it's even more stable. When I first started, I liked to get old growth Douglas fir, but it's so hard to find these days. It's almost impossible. Most tree companies uses pine, lodgepole pine. Most custom guys use a type of poplar. So yellow poplar or whatever poplar, because it's a fairly stable wood with no knots. Occasionally I would use sugar pine, but again it's very hard to find. But it's a lightweight wood that is stable and fairly strong. But the laminations help, because if you cut a tree bar, it has a lot of shape in it, and if you cut wood, it's going to move. So if you cut it, glue it back together, and then cut it again, it moves less. And then it gets reinforced with fiberglass.
When I talked to John Wayne and asked him his preference, he sent me to Matt Dillon.
No.
And so I'm wondering, of that kind, I know they're not bronc riders and that sort of thing, but I'm wondering what kind of a saddle do we see in those kinds of movies? Is it displayed here anywhere?
I guess it depends on how keen of an eye you look at the movie. I mean, so I was told, I don't know, but like the big belt buckles we all wear, that was a Hollywood thing. They made that popular, and then now that's a thing. Even if you're a ranch cowboy, now you have to have one. I think if you look at movies closely, you'll see a mix of maybe the stuff that's in the front is probably historically correct. I know some makers that have made for the movie industry, so they try to make it as period correct when the movie was supposed to happen. A lot of those saddles have like the rigging is called a Sam stack, so it's just it's wrapped around the horn and it comes down, has a ring where you. So, yeah, we didn't talk about that. These old saddles only had one. It was a single rig, so there was only one cinch. Like a modern day saddle has two cinches, a front and a back. But there was different ways they did that. So in California, early days, middle 1800s, they had the Sam stack. So they would wrap the rigging around the horn and come back down, and then they eventually went under the seat, and then it developed that way. But in the movies, you sometimes see that period style saddle. Same with the boots. The top stitching, the sewing on boots is there to stiffen boots, not just make them look pretty. But you can see some of those old cowboy boots didn't have any stitching and they were always sag. But that was what they wore at the period, so they did have the correct boots sometimes.
Any more questions, comments?
On? Okay, just a comment on, she was referring to John Wayne and that period, 50s, 60s. Those were mostly copies of the Bob Crosby saddle, so they were all looked the type with a low cantle and not a whole lot of force.
Yeah, it's whoever in Hollywood got a hold of the time to provide the props. Nowadays, they do a better job at it. Like Yellowstone, they actually go above and beyond to find stuff that's like correct. The right wagons, the right saddles. But if you look closely, sometimes you see stuff that, so a telltale sign is, where I grew up, we call it aluminium, but here you say aluminum. That wasn't around till after the Second World War. So if people tell you something is old and you see aluminum on it, it's like, wait a minute, this rigging has aluminum and you're telling me it's from the 20s. No, it's not, because aluminum wasn't around. Even stainless steel. So today, a lot of the hardware is made out of stainless. You know, it was wrought iron first, rawhide, wrought iron, and then they had the copper alloys come in, and then aluminum, and then stainless. So you can kind of date things that way sometimes. Like there's a saddle on that paint horse over there, which is fairly correct. But if you look at the conchos, they're copper. Well, the rest is silver, so there's somebody messed with it. You know, you can just, little things you can tell.
right. I don't know if this is. Can you hear me? I guess I had a question about when Nate was talking early on about the difference in the horses in this area that kind of led to the original Ellensburg tree. And I was wondering if, like, you've looked at Indian saddles for this area and if that had any influence on how the tree was built. Or I really don't know the history of Indian saddles, but I'm just curious if there was some influence there at all.
Yeah, I was never able to figure the Indian saddle out because I don't know where the front or the back is. They both look the same to me. If you look in the museums, like in Oklahoma, they almost look like a sawbuck, and those pack saddles where they have a cross front and back, and literally you can't tell. It looks the same, so you can go either way, I guess. And I think that's pretty much all. I mean, they probably rode mostly bareback. The Indians around here, I don't know much about the history. I do know they were the original cowboys, even in California. So those Franciscan missions that were set up in California, they used native people and they taught them how to become livestock herders. And that's where you get a lot of the braiding history from, because those natives didn't have money or there was no steel available to make bits and that. So they become what they call a hackamore, braided bozels and that stuff. Kind of have history from there. Even the braided riadas, because they didn't have nylon, obviously, so they used grass ropes or rawhide at the time. So that was popular. And the cinches were made out of horsehair, mostly, probably the higher end. Then you had maybe some mohair. Even the underside of the saddle sometimes had whatever they could find, burlap even. Yeah.
Piggyback onto that, Ben Snipes' right-hand man, when he came in 54, 55, left the Dalles and started going up over top to Yakima and so on and so forth. His right-hand man was a man named Job, a Klickitat man, Klickitat Indian. He knew the land, right? He knew where to go. He knew where the grass grew tall. He knew the bad places. And throughout, Ben Snipes relied on that, right? He relied on these people who were here to ride for him. There was talking about when Thorpe came here, Mortimer Thorpe came and settled in Thorpe area, he brought with him a lot of Native Americans to ride and to be his cowboys for him, right? So there were a lot of non-Kittitas people who came into the valley. They were riding horses, they were cowboys, they came with the settlers and with the cowboys and rode into the valley, and they stuck around, right? They were here, they became known, they got a name for themselves and whatnot.
Yeah, and Farrell, one of the guys that made saddles here, he could speak the language. And they would come to town and hang out at his saddle shop, the Indians did, because he was friendly to them. And I was told that the ground where the fairgrounds is used to belong to them too, and they gave it up to become the fairgrounds.
Sayinwat Auhai was her name. Yep. She had a teepee. There's a cool picture online, of her teepee sitting there when the creek ran through there naturally and whatnot, where the fairgrounds is now against Craig's Hill before it was all bulldozed out, and that was her allotment, her encampment, and whatnot. And story goes, it was given up with the idea it would be used as a fairgrounds and used with the Yakima people there as well.
I've got a question back. I'll get you.
We're just curious what other things you craft besides saddles.
Well, if you give me enough time and money, maybe I'll try a rocket. But no, I just like building things. So, I had some crazy ideas before, but I grew up welding and horseshoeing and this and that. But I like making saddles. That's probably the most thing. I've made boots, but with the saddles comes silver smithing, so I had to learn that. You can branch off in different directions, but then it's easy to get too far behind and spread out. So I'm trying to just come back to be known as just a saddle maker. that has the ability to put silver on it, this and that and that. But yeah.
Have you made jewelry?
I've made, earrings that looks like conchos. And then usually just cuff bracelets. But it's all Western bright cut, so it's a Western flair to it, not jewelry in the sense of fine jewelry.
Janneman, you've been working on this project for a while. I just kind of curious, have you enjoyed the historical research of digging into saddle history, or has it been frustrating to have the unanswered questions?
I mean, I've always liked history, so everywhere I go, I try to know the history. And sometimes take a long time to. Just today, I learned something about, I forget what it was, but it's like, oh, I wish I knew that 20 years ago. The frustrating part is so you look at the physical saddles we have around, and you look at the recorded history, and the two don't quite match up. And that's the frustration. It's like, where's the disconnect? Either the guys that wrote it down were lying to us, or, and then there's just a few unanswered questions that it'd be kind of cool to know, this and that, but it wasn't recorded. But I just spoke to a friend of mine. He says, nobody records what they're doing. I mean, we didn't write down today for what we did for some future generation. Who cares? So it'll be kind of cool to know some nuance to it, but at some point, we're just going to claim that we're correct, and then Texas has to stand in line behind us.
We all know, too, as soon as we get stuff published into that booklet all done up, that's when people are going to come out the woodwork, prove to us that shining little star that says something. They're waiting. They're waiting until we can't change it. Any more questions? Any more thoughts on the saddle making in general? Any more thoughts for Janneman tonight?
Janneman, are you making a kind of a blow-by-blow recollection of what you're doing with the saddle? Pictures and a video. Something.
Yeah, but that'll take, well, I can. Yeah, I guess I do. Maybe it's not, I forget, and then I miss some steps. But if I do it in real time, then people will see how slow I am. So I don't want to. So maybe I'll wait till I'm done.
You can take all the pictures and you just cut out the ones you think make you slow.
Well, no, it's a progression of it. So, like, if there's a few days missing. We'll work on it. I got some going that kind of will show the not so romantic part of the pults where you're always dirty and on your knees, and but yeah, like the cantle will be sewn by hand. You can't use a machine. It'll be 10 inches to the inch, which is more refined than a modern day saddle. So instead of taking 3 hours, it's going to take 7 hours because it's just the way it is.
And I guess really touching on that base, like we are really excited about using the saddle, the replica saddle, as a fundraising opportunity for the museum. So we are very interested in promoting this and recording it, and as much as reaching a nationwide audience of telling the Ellensburg saddle story and also Janneman's story.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool to tell the story. So, like, for instance, the horn. Well, first of all, with the current political things, like a lot of the foundries went belly up in the last few years. So just to find a saddle horn is next near impossible. There's still a couple foundries in Texas, but they don't really want to sell to anybody. So, like, there was a big, several months long journey just to get a saddle horn that was correct to the time period. They had to jump through several hoops to eventually end up in Portland at the foundry that'll willing to cast this thing that had the right shape, blah blah blah. Just try to get it right. But yeah.
So you have all heard tonight. You got to hear about the saddle. You got to hear about the history of the Ellensburg tree, the mystery surrounding it at this point. You got to hear Janneman talk about it. You know Janneman's going to do good work. Everything he does turns out amazing. And we are tripping over this cord. We are raffling off this saddle. For years we did art for the Rodeo Hall of Fame. For our moneymaker, we decided this year that we would change it up. And being the 100th year, we decided that it's a year to hold a raffle. It's a year to kind of look back at our history. So we are selling tickets here for this. This is like Daniel talked about and mentioned, it's going to be a nationwide raffle. We are in cahoots right now with the Cowboy Channel. We're in cahoots with the Cowboy and Indian magazine to get this known. It's a saddle that has touched everybody in our country at this point. So we're pushing beyond. We're pushing out. But we are selling tickets tonight. We're going to be selling tickets all the way through. I believe December is when we're pulling the 23rd at 1923. 723, we'll pull it out of hopefully a big bucket at that point and pull the winner of this saddle. With the saddle comes the history that you heard, more to that history as well. I've worked on, Janneman's worked on, Mike Allen has worked on as well. A membership to the Ellensburg Rodeo Hall of Fame comes with that raffle ticket as well. Yes,
So the booklet is kind of, I think the booklet is cool because everybody will have a piece of the history in that little booklet, which you can see pictures, diagrams, references. It'll explain it to the normal person, see what we're doing, and have some old pictures, new pictures. Then we can distribute that.
It's going to be a bound booklet too, with a cover on it. It's not just going to be a flimsy paper. It's going to be a good, solid quality publication of the history of our saddle, of pictures of Pete, of Farrell, of the association saddle, and much more detail to everything that we've been talking about tonight. Janneman, the creation of this modern saddle that he's doing now, this replica saddle, is all going to be in that booklet as well. Sorry.
What in today's market, what's the worth of the saddle that Janneman's making?
Janneman, I'm letting you feel that one.
Well, pricing is always difficult. So, you guys have seen the Shark Tank, with that. What is that? Barbara. I just listened to a podcast, and she used to be a commercial real estate in New York City, and she sold her business for $66 million. But the first offer she got was $22 million, and she said, pricing is all BS. It just depends how big your balls are. You get what you if you're confident about it, but to put it's not about the item, it's about the story, which we should preserve. You see these saddles similar in Oklahoma City in the museum, that every year in October there's a kind of a saddle display. Most of those saddles are dated saddles, not dated, but older versions, but they're very ornate, but they're all 30,000 plus. So if they were to make the same type of saddle, this will have less Christmas ornamentation on it, because that was just what they see. This saddle is basically plain, so we're staying. It'll be more elaborate than this, but by the time you validate something like that, one of a kind, it's gonna be like, I don't know, 20,000 or more.
You're selling history at that point. We run into this trying to put monetary values to things we have in the archives, right? To ensure them, to make sure we don't lose them and whatnot. And to Joe Blow on the street, to somebody from Seattle who doesn't know what's going on, that's worth 20 bucks, right? That's an old saddle that's falling apart. It doesn't look very good to the naked eye. Somebody from Ellensburg who heard this story, who knows saddles, gets connected to rodeo, is going to put a lot more to that saddle, right? That means something to them. That's a feral saddle. It's got the stamp. It says Ellensburg. Ellensburg still has the H on the back, so it's 1894. We lost the H, so that holds history, right? So, yeah, you're putting monetary value to history. I asked my wife, I'm willing to overpay for history any day of the week, right? That's something that means a lot to me. To other people, it might not. So you hit that hardship as well when you're running into a replica saddle. But to cowboys, to people who follow rodeo, to people who know saddles and know this type of stuff, this saddle is worth a lot. Janneman saddle is worth a lot. You put the name Janneman on that saddle, it's worth a lot. It's a quality product at that point as well, a quality replica saddle. So, Janneman, thank you for coming tonight. A round of applause. Please, again, I know I have said this many times, these raffle tickets are for sale. It's a chance to own a piece of history, a chance to be drawn for that history. If anything, you get a nice booklet, co-authored by myself. Also, we have more events coming up, so please check out the 100th anniversary dinner that we're having. Please check out our induction banquet. It's being held at Central this year. And 23rd of June, we are doing Behind the Chutes is our speaker. It's committeemen and volunteers. Is that right, Daniel?
Yeah, there'll be the rodeo committee will take the focus of that and talk about the process of volunteering at the rodeo, and then the improvements that the rodeo committee has made over the years to the Ellensburg Rodeo. And also focus on what they're going to do for the 100th year. So promoting this year's event also.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. We appreciate it.